Welcome to the webinar today. We are here to talk about, today's discussion will be about the partnership between Red Canary and Carbon Black and how that leads to great security outcomes. But first and foremost, these are tough times out there for a lot of folks, and want to make sure that everybody out there hears from us that we care about you, and we hope that you all are doing as good as you can given the circumstances. So hope you all are doing well. First and foremost, most important question, will this be recorded? Yes, it will. So if you need to drop off partway through and you miss, we'll miss you, but you will get a follow-up with a link to the recording. So thanks for joining us today. Who's talking to you? My name is Chris Rothy. I'm the Chief Product Officer and one of the co-founders of Red Canary, based here in sunny Denver, Colorado. In our office to use the internet here for the first time in quite a while. So it's nice to be out of the house. Kane, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
I'm Kane Lightala. I lead the Americas Enterprise team here at VMware Carbon Black. I've been with the company for about 5 years and had a great partnership over those years with Red Canary. So I'm really excited to be here today. Thanks, Chris, for the invitation. I'm really excited to reflect back on our partnership and what the market has in plan for us going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us today, Kane. Partnership between Carbon Black and Red Canary goes back to the early 2010s. And Carbon Black has a very broad partner ecosystem. Red Canary, we've added partners over the years. But there's something about our partnership between these two companies that makes it special and different than most other partnerships. And that's really all about our shared philosophy and approach to detecting and preventing attacks. Kane, could you explain that philosophy a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So that philosophy all really pivots around the assumption that we cannot know what's bad ahead of time. And this has been very contrary to the vast majority of security solutions in the previous decade, and definitely in the foundations that endpoint security were built on. If we go back 30 odd years to when the endpoint security market first emerged, malware was emerging that attackers were creating in order to use the same piece of malware to infect many organizations. And thus, the security industry was born, pivoted around some major antivirus players that relied on someone somewhere in the world first being attacked, those providers getting access to that attack or that malware and creating a signature and distributing that signature in an expedited fashion in order to protect everybody else. For the first couple of decade and a half or so, that was a reasonably effective methodology. In the early 2000s, we started seeing these threats becoming larger scale with the emergence of mainstream worms. Most of these worms are using the same platforms, the same kits but different set of behaviors, or packaging them. So the challenge was that signatures are incredibly brittle. Very easy to change the hash of a file, change the IP address of the command and control server, or what have you, to evade those signatures. And thus, the bad guys completely changed their methods through the mid 2000s to focus on polymorphic malware and other targeted attacks where they could build a specific threat, specific attack, which would easily evade these signature-based technologies, and thus proving a lot of our hypothesis and philosophy is true, that you can't rely on knowing what's bad ahead of time. This really, from both the Red Canary side and the Carbon Black side, pivoted around, well, how do we solve the problem by looking at behaviors and looking at those methods of behavior to detect and respond and prevent from malicious threats?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Kane. And so where did this philosophy come from and how has it developed over the years? We'll spend a little bit of time thinking through that question. If you rewind all the way back to the early 2010s, kind of the pre-EDR era, what you'd find, like Kane described, a very different method both to prevention and then also to detection and incident response. So myself, I was at an incident response provider during this time. And when we'd show up to investigate a breach, we'd show up, dig through logs, pull out the forensics tools. We spent like 90% of our time data collection before doing any actual investigative work or analysis. And not to mention that many times by the time we showed up, by the time the breach had been detected, it had been entrenched and moving around for months and a lot of times years. And really that's what led to the birth of Carbon Black back in the 2011 timeframe. And with it, the category that became endpoint detection and response. The premise, as Kane described, was very simple. Collect all the data that you need to do an incident response ahead of time, so that when you walk in, you sit down at the console and you just start investigating. And that led to more proactive ways of doing detection that we'll talk about. But that was kind of the initial premise. Kane, to build on what you said before, like, why was this approach so game-changing?
Well, it was game-changing, as you said. 90% of the time you were spending collecting the information that you need to actually investigate an incident. So it was game-changing from a efficiency standpoint, the fact that you already had all of that information at your fingertips. But secondly, the actual outcome of the IR, this was game-changing, because when you're just dusting for fingerprints using forensics, looking for little pieces of evidence that might suggest what actually happened, the best case you're ever going to be able to present is really a hypothesis of what happened, versus if you have a recording of everything that took place, you're absolutely sure, you have absolute certainty about actually what happened, what was impacted, date and time stamps of everything, in addition to being much more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we were there, we loved Carbon Black, we used it. We used several early versions of the product, and maybe there's some folks on the phone who were there for those phases. Our founding team, myself included, really identified this need for a service that took this incredible source of telemetry, and instead of waiting for, you know, the red phone to ring to jump in and do incident response, to try to take that data and operationalize it on a day-to-day basis to try to drive detection and response outcomes. And that's what led to the birth of Red Canary in 2014. We launched as the first Carbon Black technology partner, continued our journey of what we were passionate about, of cataloging and efficiently detecting attacker behavior or attacker techniques, primarily through the use of behavioral analytics. And this was before the term managed detection and response existed, right? So for better or for worse, we helped Gartner define that category and kind of became the first in that space. Came from your perspective, from the primarily technology vendor perspective, how does Carbon Black think about and see the need for MDR in the market?
Well, we created this technology to enable teams to be able to detect faster, respond faster, so they're hitting off threats before they come incidents or breaches. And we're mindful that we wanted to make this available to organizations in the form factor that suited their business most appropriately. Maybe a very well-resourced security operations team would like to take Carbon Black's technology and operationalize it themselves. We're mindful that many organizations don't have the resources, or maybe the skill set, or it might just be more efficient to look to a third party. So we analyzed the space, and we determined, we analyzed the space to determine whether we should offer a set of services. We realized we're really the experts at building the technology. And so we chose to go and partner with the experts at delivering the services. And this is where our partnership with Red Canary kicked off, and what led to what is now the category called managed detection.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, maybe stepping forward 1 year, maybe the same year, Carbon Black and Bit9 come together. Why was that important?
Yeah, so Carbon Black, you may or may not know, but the company Carbon Black as it stands today is a merging of both Bit9 and Carbon Black. Carbon Black was a very, very small company that was focused specifically on this incident response area. Bit9 had been around for a little bit longer. Bit9 had really pioneered the zero trust model on systems. You may know of it as application control, application whitelisting, and some other controls. Still today, vastly the most effective way at preventing malware-based threats, only allowing trusted software to execute on those systems. We were very successful, and we're getting a lot of feedback from our customers that we weren't just providing them a very, very high level of security, but we're also providing them great visibility into what was executing on those systems and how and how it was executing. And this was feeding valid information into their security operations teams. So our roadmap really pivoted and started focusing on, well, how do we augment this really, really high effective level of security we're providing our customers to help them detect and respond faster? One thing led to another. We got introduced to some of the team there at Carbon Black. Many of our goals and our cultures were aligned, and we thought if we bring the two companies together, we're able to round off the protect, detect, and respond life cycle, and we came together as one.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember this time, and I this quote from the press release as I was doing research that said, only Carbon Black continuously records and centrally retains all endpoint activity, making it easy to track an attacker's every action, instantly scope every incident, unravel entire attacks, and determine root causes. And as I thought about it, and as I experienced the combination of that with that default deny application control approach, the companies that we worked with that were the most locked down is the ones who had Bit9, high enforcement, just an amazing difference between that and kind of the wide open wild west. Of course, there are sometimes cultural challenges with that approach, but from a security standpoint, an incredible solution. If you flip forward to 2015, one of the most popular features of both Carbon Black and Red Canary was released. With the power CB gave us to investigate threats, to do detection, kind of the obvious next step was to take that one step further and be able to take action immediately from the same console, same set of tools. And so Carbon Black Live Response enabled that. Red Canary quickly followed with a feature we called response plans, which was basically the ability, once we detected something, built the timeline up to be able to, push button, take action on endpoints. And I think this is a really great example of the tight partnership that Carbon Black and Red Canary have had over the years, where game-changing feature like CB Live Response comes out, and Red Canary, just a half step later, is there with the service offering to really put it into operations. From the Carbon Black perspective, Kane, I'm curious, what did Carbon Black Live Response mean to CB customers?
Yeah, Live Response once again was another major game-changing moment for the industry. We'd already revolutionized detection, right, by enabling a much more efficient and effective method of detection. However, in organizations, there was still a lot of silos that would prevent response. Personally, I remember a few years back dealing with a large telecommunications prospect. They weren't a customer of Carbon Black's at the time. Their detection program had enabled them to detect a compromised server. However, it took them over 37 days to actually go through the appropriate levels of change control to cut through all of those silos in their operational processes inside this large organization to actually enable security to get access to the server. So Live Response gave security teams the ability to cut through a lot of that red tape, and as soon as detection has taken place, reach down to that endpoint, kill the process, pull back some more artifacts for further investigation, isolate the system, or any host of different actions. So this was really, really game-changing to enable security teams to respond faster once detection had happened. And secondly, this also opened up a massive marketplace, adding the R to the managed detection and response category that enabled third-party service providers to actually offer a service that doesn't just pivot around detection, but enables them to actually take response on a customer's behalf. So, whilst it seemed to some as a cool feature we added, we really revolutionized the ability for organizations to respond fast once detection had taken place.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when we were first talking about this feature, and being an old IT guy myself, I was sitting there thinking, no way are people gonna like this? Nobody wants that level of access, from a response tool. And I was frankly dead wrong. I was overwhelmed by the fact that it did exactly what you described. And security teams who a lot of times didn't have the tools or ability to kind of take surgical action on endpoints to stop attackers, got a ton of value out of it on day one. So those are my memories of CB Live Response. And still today, it's the most full-featured response tool like it on the market. Customers continue to drive value.
I would add to that in the fact that still today, it's the capability that's providing a huge amount of ROI back to our clients. Right. Integration with SOAR, as an example, as organizations move forward to more automation around their security operations, the ability to reach down to that endpoint and maybe collect some more artifacts to ensure that you're automating your your response faster, or actually take some automated actions, right? It's a very, very compelling capability that helps organizations improve their security programs drastically.
Yeah, absolutely. You go a little bit farther forward, and Carbon Black gets in the next gen antivirus game.
Yeah. So the back in 2015, we were taking on a huge amount of customers. Customers were using multiple products from Carbon Black. They were using them to augment gaps in their antivirus controls and self. And what was clear to us was organizations were dealing with, were going to start dealing with what I consider agent fatigue, right? There's many different risk and compliance challenges they're dealing with, many of which required yet another agent. And frankly, Carbon Black's EDR offering was yet just another agent. And so we sat down as a team and we looked at it strategically, and we determined that we're going to have to help the organization solve two problems. The first problem, introduce a much higher level of security than traditional antivirus offerings are going to providing, yet don't introduce the restrictions that technologies like zero trust models might put on an organization, right? So more dynamic environments might want to allow users to install and uninstall software. We really needed to solve for that problem. The second problem that we needed to solve for, we had to do it in a fast, effective, and efficient way, and we couldn't just be adding in yet another agent. So in 2015, we embarked on a set of research to determine how we're going to solve this solution. For both the answer to the security question and answer to the efficiency question, the answer was cloud, and hence we introduced what we called at the time Carbon Black Defense, which was the industry's first convergence of both next generation antivirus and EDR built on a behavioral detection platform.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. And, we go for a couple more years. Carbon Black goes public. What did that mean to you, to Carbon Black, to the customers, and the market at large?
Well, it was an awesome day for the company. The company was founded in 2002. Many people have put a lot of effort over those years. It was a massive day for our customers, all of which have saw their investment they made in Carbon Black be validated as a category that's worthy of a public company. And this was a massive day also for the industry. Very first next generation endpoint security player that had made it to the public markets and could stand alone as its own standalone category. So great day for us, great day for our customers, and great day for the industry. You're right, Chris. I was actually there. You can't see me in the picture. I'm behind someone's head, or maybe Patrick's hands, or somewhere there. But it was a really big day for the industry, and the market, validating the emergence of this category holistically.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a fun day. Also in 2018, Carbon Black comes out with Carbon Black Threat Hunter, which is now known as Cloud EDR, combining EDR with next-gen antivirus into the single agent solution. And, Ken, you already mentioned this, the desire to have a single platform and agent fatigue. What did that mean to your customers and to the industry at large?
Yeah. So as I said, in 2015, we looked at the problem statement. We knew the market needed to swing back to a consolidated approach, and we embarked on that journey from 2016 onwards. 2018 is when we launched our threat hunting and incident response platform for advanced teams, all on the single agent, single platform. So this was the first step into that convergence capability after our initial launch of a converged EDR and GAV offering. And as we'll cover a little bit later, and as you'll hear from the roadmap discussions we might have with each of you, we've been launching more and more capabilities on this platform, and we'll continue to, which gives organizations the ability to turn on or off capabilities as they need, without deploying more infrastructure, without deploying another agent, without having to integrate and change their operational processes yet again.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from the Red Canary perspective, when Carbon Black decided to do this and brought out this product, we moved very quickly to have support. And we've helped many of our customers, migrate from the CB Response product over to Threat Hunter or now Carbon Black Cloud. And It may seem like a trivial thing, but a lot of times there's a lot of anxiety. If you've got Carbon Black response in place, it's working great for you. You may be nervous about going to a new platform, and that's what we were able to do and help our customers get over that anxiety, help those migrations go smooth, and get on with it. This feels like 10 years ago, Kane.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, we built a partnership with VMware in order to see out their strategic vision, or help them see out their strategic vision of building security intrinsically into the platform. As you know, VMware is a very large provider of much of the world's most critical infrastructure, especially on the workload side, but not holistically on the workload side, even on the workspace side. So we kicked up a partnership in 2017 to integrate our platform into the vSphere platform to help provide advanced levels of security. One thing led to another. That security partnership was very, very successful. Teams got to know each other. It resonated really well in the marketplace. One thing led to the other, and we decided to join forces together, and VMware acquired the stock of Carbon Black off the public markets. And as of October, we became the new business unit, security business unit inside VMware, where we reside today. And that's enabled us really to see out a much broader vision going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, super exciting. And we've seen so much, quick enhancements of the product and an amazing roadmap come out of that, both the partnership and now as a combined company. Most recent example of our aligned strategy and shared philosophy is Red Canary. Recently, we expanded our support to the full VMware Carbon Black Cloud product suite, specifically in the area of Endpoint Standard, formerly CB Defense, if you're tracking those at home. Red Canary now ingests and investigates all the alerts created by Endpoint Standard, and then help our customers configure prevention policies. So that gives us a chance to complete the loop there as well, like Kane described, where something bad happens on the endpoint, we can be involved in detecting it, if we're seeing it, that means it got past your prevention setup, and then we can help do the full investigation, understand where you can close that gap and help you through that. So that's the most recent example of that shared vision. So hopefully you enjoyed kind of our walkthrough of our joint history. For some of you who've been there along the way, it might have been a little repetitive, or you may have your own memories of the events, and it would definitely be good to hear those. Anything we left out or was meaningful to you, so send it in the chat or hit us up on Twitter or whatever. As you can see, the relationship between our two companies and products has definitely grown and evolved, but always centered around that shared philosophy and belief that behavior-based detection is much more resilient and the only way to really make a meaningful impact in security. We just believe in a different way of securing endpoints than the market has. We're going to move forward, and now that we've looked at history, look at the way we deliver outcomes today. And we'll try to answer the question of why you'd choose Carbon Black plus Red Canary. I could stand here and say, why wouldn't you choose the vendor that invented EDR and the vendor who invented MDR? But that would be rude. So let's go a little bit deeper. And at the end of the day, for us, it's all about delivering outcomes, right? That's what both of our companies are about. When we say outcomes, we mean meaningful improvement to your organization's security. And to do that, we need the best technology. Carbon Black, we need the best people, we need the best processes, and we need to combine that together. And really, that's what makes our combined solution so valuable and so powerful for customers. This is kind of the simplified view of how our two solutions work together. You've got endpoints. Both your users and the attackers like to use them for various things. The attackers are smart enough to blend in as best they can, cover their tracks. And really, that's why we believe so strongly in the need for unfiltered telemetry, and why you need to bring it into a central location like the Carbon Black Cloud. And the main reason for that is attackers like to mess with logs too, right? So if you're depending on endpoints to be there, and for those artifacts to be on the endpoint, they may not be there when you need a critical question answered. Once the telemetry gets to Carbon Black, quite a few things happen, several that are important to this discussion. First, that unfiltered telemetry gets sent over to Red Canary. We apply thousands of behavioral analytics to look for interesting activity. All of our analytics are mapped to MITRE ATT&CK, so we can use a common language when we communicate back about what the attacker did, what phase they were at, what techniques they used. Second, Carbon Black also does detection, obviously, and any alerts created there are also sent to Red Canary, correlated with the endpoint telemetry and investigated alongside, our own events. Our team of detection engineers investigates every potential threat, confirming those that need to be remediated. We're 24/7 shop, so we're there, whenever, holidays, weekends, whenever attackers are there, we'll be there. When a threat is confirmed, we trigger flexible automation on our side. We've got a pretty advanced lightweight SOAR platform on the back edge of Red Canary that allows you to define the triggers and conditions to take action, and then very specifically what you want done with it. So I just saw a question come in that says, do we support Splunk and ServiceNow? Absolutely. Very good way to take things from the Red Canary console, move them into Splunk, sometimes trigger automation in those platforms, and then feedback from those platforms to close out tickets in the Red Canary system as well. And really what it's all about is being able to give you the ability to highly customize response actions for specific areas. So when the first time you detect something in an area, maybe you need help, we have to figure it out. We got to manually figure out what the response should be. Ideally, as we go forward, the next time we shouldn't have to do that manually. We should be able to think through it and say, hey, is there an automated set of actions we can take here? Maybe it's take the machine offline through isolation. Maybe it's be more aggressive and kill the processes associated. All of that is configurable. With that, there's a human on the Red Canary side. We call them incident handlers, who's there as sort of your best friend from a security standpoint. They're there every time a threat's detected to help answer questions, figure out what you should do. They also help you think through, hey, what could have stopped this, and what can we do? What can we get on our roadmap to stop this in the future? They're there kind of for what you need. So that's the high level picture. Automated, I didn't call this out specifically, but automated response actions flow back through that Carbon Black live response capability, take action directly on endpoints, a lot of times even when you're asleep. So that's the kind of the high level picture to keep in mind as we walk through the next couple slides and work through each solution. Kane, I'll hand it over to you to talk through Carbon Black.
Yeah. So I've seen there's been a couple of questions also hit the chat around Carbon Black now that we're part of VMware. But the super exciting opportunity that we have here at VMware is we're aiming to transform the security industry across a number of different dimensions. The first is today, the industry is very siloed. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why later on in the presentation, but lots of different security challenges, risks, and compliance requirements all require yet another technology, many of which are siloed and don't integrate. You're familiar with Carbon Black. Over the last 10 years, we've integrated in over 120 different vendors' technologies. We've been on this path and journey for quite some time to unify through integrations. I also saw a question around Splunk and ServiceNow. Yes, absolutely. We have out-of-the-box integrations with both of those platforms. So the journey that we're on here at VMware is to change the market from being just siloed to being unified, very, very deeply unified amongst the VMware ecosystem, but not exclusively just the VMware ecosystem. Secondly, many security controls, especially in the EDR side, are very threat-centric. They lack context around the business application and the criticality of the business application. They lack context around the risk associated with that workload as that threat may have been observed on. And so as part of VMware, we're aiming to change that focus in the platforms from not just being threat-centric, but providing a lot more context to defenders and responders. And then last, but certainly not least, the big game-changing piece here on the VMware side is up until now, organizations only had the ability to design and deploy their infrastructure and then go and choose a whole host of different security controls and bolt them into the infrastructure. Now we're part of VMware, being a large provider of much of the world's most critical infrastructure, both on-prem, in the hybrid cloud, in the public cloud, new modern ways of deploying applications, virtual desktops, physical desktops, and the like. We have the ability to take our technology and build that into those platforms to see out that nirvana goal of having security by design and being agentless. So That's where Carbon Black's going together with VMware amongst the broader portfolio. However, specifically to endpoint security, if you just click to the next slide there, Chris, we've been working, this doesn't impact our journey we're on specifically on endpoint security. We're building a platform that's agnostic across operating system, agnostic across cloud, and agnostic across vendor, like you would expect from an endpoint security player. We're planning to build that deeper into the VMware-based platforms, so there's no need for an agent on those platforms. So think about vSphere in the data center, agentless security at the hypervisor layer that you just need to turn on rather than having to install an agent that may consume systems resources and require some operational overhead. We're still seeing out that journey of building a platform that provides multiple capabilities, enabling organizations to turn those capabilities on or off when and where necessary. So on that platform today, you've heard a lot about the next generation antivirus capabilities, the EDR capabilities that Carbon Black invented, the threat hunting capabilities and response capabilities, managed detection along with our partners here, Red Canary. And later in the year, we'll be launching vulnerability management. We'll be launching some app encryption capabilities and some specific offerings in order to provide high levels of protection across workloads, whether they're cloud workloads, whether they're on-premise workloads, and or modern application deployment methods through containers. So lots of innovation going on at the moment, all condensed and consolidated into the Carbon Black Cloud, where that single sensor will check in. However, the integrations don't stop there, and the unification doesn't stop there. We'll talk about it in a few slides, but we're planning to open up that Carbon Black Cloud, not just to our third-party security partners that we've already integrated with, but amongst some of the other technologies, security technologies that VMware have in their $1.2 billion security portfolio. So this strategy that we laid out in 2015, we continue to execute against it. Just being part of VMware gives us more resources to execute faster and more effectively. And that's being recognized by the analysts, both the technical analysts, the likes of AV Test, who do technical testing, as well as the analysts such as Forrester and Gartner, who look at market trajectory, et cetera, around vendors. So a lot of innovation coming out of Carbon Black, and the earliest adopter of all of that innovation consistently over the last decade has been Red Canary.
Yeah, thanks for the shout out, King. Appreciate that. Hey, there's a question that came in that I think this would be a great time to answer. The question from Michael was, does the telemetry collected extend beyond the endpoint to cloud and network? And I think, as I think about the way that Carbon Black's been brought into the VMware ecosystem, like the answer is absolutely yes, but maybe you can shine some light there.
Yeah. So the Carbon Black Cloud was designed to collect endpoint telemetry or system telemetry, pull it into that cloud, use a level of behavioral analytics in order to detect malicious or suspicious behavior. So we've always been the source that records the telemetry in the first place, collects it, analyzes it, and bubbles up the items that need to be investigated for analysis. Over the years, we've integrated into a number of third parties that we could augment our telemetry with by pushing it out of the Carbon Black Cloud to, say, for example, a network telemetry provider, or collect some telemetry from a network telemetry provider. So absolutely, we're building out more and more of those capabilities. If I look across the strategy around cloud, the strategy around cloud is to ensure that our sensor supports collecting telemetry from more and more of those cloud platforms. And then secondly, from network, we've integrated into some of the NDR players already, the third-party NDR players. But with our recent acquisition of LastLine, we're taking LastLine's NDR capabilities, embedding it into VMware's NSX platform, which is the market-leading virtual networking and network security stack, in order to converge both endpoint telemetry and network telemetry into a single pane of glass powered by that analytics engine to automate detection. So think of the Carbon Black Cloud as starting off as an EDR cloud and converging to a security cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you Red Canary's take on that. So, we're very opinionated, and we believe that endpoint telemetry is the number one thing you need in order to do a great job detecting and preventing attacks in your environment. But as endpoints change their profile and morph and things like that, we do have to get telemetry from different sources, right? And cloud is obviously a huge one of those. We're still always going to say, hey, if you've got a device where users are doing things and attackers are as well, like, we need telemetry off of that. But there is definitely more of a story there of bringing things together. Red Canary is starting down that path, and this fall sneak preview will be bringing out some capability focused on bringing in and correlating network and beyond. Kane, anything else on the Carbon Black side before I jump ahead?
I could speak for hours, but I'll.
All right.
Let's keep going.
Well, thanks for the time, then. All right. The best way to think about Red Canary's impact in the way we work is really to consider in an example environment. In this case, this is an environment with about 1,500 endpoints. In any nominal week for a reasonably clean environment, we'd expect to see something like 1 billion telemetry records. That's individual things that happen. So think processes started, network connections, registry modifications, you name it. From that, our processes, our correlation engine would reduce that down to around 200,000 interesting data points. Then apply our big array of behavioral analytics tools, and that might spit out, in this example, something like 12,000 events that are interesting and should be investigated. We go through another round of correlation at that point, and go through what we call suppression, which is effectively using the results of previous investigations to remove things that we know are going to be false positives. And then we end up with around 700 potential investigated by a human. And we have a team called the Red Canary Detection Engineering Team. They do those investigations 24/7. They also, as they see new behaviors from attackers, they're responsible for updating and creating new behavioral analytics. Kind of a unique approach we have. We're not segmented internally where there's a threat intel team who creates rules and then a SOC who has to deal with all the pain of investigating those things. They're very integrated. And that approach has been really the key for us to be able to say, hey, when you're a detection engineer and you analyze a confirmed threat, don't just think of it as like, I'm going to send this thing back to the customer. Think about what wasn't detected here. What did we miss, right? And then use that information as a way to go back and build up and make our detection more resilient. That's what we do. And then the result of that hard work is to figure out the root cause, write up a detailed timeline for confirmed threats. In this environment, we'd expect to see something like 3 malicious attacks or malicious threats per week, about a 1,500 endpoint environment. And then again, at that point is when we trigger our response capabilities, whether it's automated or manual, to stop the threat. So if you think about, if you're going to go build this out yourself, assuming you can get the detection built out, that huge array of behavioral analytics, you can then see our estimate of what it would cost you to then investigate all of them, right? And so when you think about the value proposition for Red Canary, it's really all about getting a 24/7 team that does all this investigation for you, a lot of times for less than it would cost you for one new security analyst. And you don't have to, if you're a small enough team, you don't have to worry about staffing 24/7. That's what Red Canary is. And ultimately, like, this is the, like Kane described, this is where the magic is they provide us this amazing data. They provide us the tools to go back and do things. And we take it and build out the team that you might need to build yourself, if not for Red Canary. So we'll move on now. We talked about the past. We talked a little bit about where we're at today and what the outcomes we're delivering now. Now let's click forward and start talking about some of the trends that are shaping the future of security and endpoints in general. The first, kind of this evolution of the size of incidents. And Kane, you had some great context on this, so I'll let you take this.
Yeah, when I first joined Carbon Black about 5 years ago, we were involved in many breach investigations month on month. However, most of them, it was a small number holistically by quantity, but they were very large scale breaches driven by very large scale actors, large scale organized crime, or more commonly nation state actors with big targets in mind and very large scale compromises. But fast forward now to 2020, We're involved in thousands, literally thousands of incident responses each year. And some quarters, our technology will be used in, over 1,000 in a quarter. So we've got many more smaller scale incidents, some of which, often are using just as sophisticated, processes and methodologies than some of these big, larger scale, sophisticated threats we're using in the past. Obviously, the intentions have changed somewhat. There's a lot more organized crime looking to monetize some of these threats. Ransomware is a big one, which I think we'll talk about as well. But there's been a big evolution from large-scale incidents to many, many more smaller scale incidents that in some cases are equally as impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we see in kind of the next level down from the technology standpoint, a lot of this is enabled by the use of those non-malware attacks that you talked about earlier, Kane, like being able to get those things onto systems, not have to worry as much about evading defenses and just use tools that are already on the box has really enabled a much broader array. One thing that always amazes me, like when we think about a lot of these small attacks, and you mentioned ransomware is kind of the place where this shows up the most. Like we'll see attacks and we're like, man, these guys were one hop away from the crown jewels of this company.
Right.
And they chose to run a crypto miner on this machine. And you're like, that, for me, like thinking of attackers in the past, like that doesn't make sense. But that's what you see now is instead of, and certainly that still happens, but people with incredible access, like the Twitter hack from a couple weeks ago, right? People getting access to these world leaders' Twitter accounts, and they use it to run a Bitcoin scam. Kind of blows your mind. But yeah, that's definitely an evolution of their tactics.
So I think the barriers to entry for these attackers have significantly lowered, right? There's a lot of kits out there that use very, very sophisticated techniques. Those techniques often bypass traditional technology, traditional controls that the vast majority of organizations are still relying on today. And it's resulting in many, many smaller scale breaches where the organized crime or, threat actors are using to try and profit, rather than cause, massive sets of destruction.
That's right. Yeah. And, ransomware is probably the best lens to look at this through. I remember the first time I saw Crypto Locker back in 2013, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most deviously brilliant thing I've ever seen. But the approach back then was find, a prime target, the CEO of a company or whatever, and try and compromise that machine and ransom that machine and do it for a big dollar amount. And then what we saw over time was, well, let's just get it on as many amounts as we can and try and get $10 from each one of them. And now we've seen kind of a shift back as availability attacks of taking away your access to your machine or to your data are now combined with the confidentiality attacks where, hey, if I'm the attacker, I'm on this system, I'm going to ransom it. If I take some of their data and I communicate to them, hey, like, yes, I jacked up your system, I encrypted your files, but also took your data and I'm going to release it. That multiplication allows or is leading to more and more companies having to make tough decisions and pay ransoms and gives the attacker the ability to extort more money. So that was kind of the wave we saw in 2018 with the Emotet, TrickBot, Ryuk, trifecta. And then as the most recent ones that we've been seeing, and there aren't a lot of these examples yet, but adding on to that a regulatory component. So attackers getting that data, getting sensitive user data, and then saying, hey, not only did I jack up your system, not only am I threatening to release your confidential information, I'm also going to call your DPA or your GDPR representative and get you in trouble from a regulatory standpoint. And so these are all just multiplying factors to get you to pay a bigger and bigger ransom over time. So that's been a very interesting trend we've been following in the ransomware area. Kane, I don't know if there's anything you'd add to that.
Yeah, I would just, absolutely acknowledge that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing in our threat research, our threat reports, and the incident responses that our team and our partners' teams have been involved in. Like, there's been a massive shift toward just ransoming for availability to ransoming organizations, not just for availability, but for the confidentiality, stealing their information, holding it ransom, and organized crime are profiting from it, which is why there's more and more groups day in, day out, which is proving one thing. It's proving the controls that organizations are using to protect themselves today just are not armed and equipped in order to protect from these new and emerging threats. So it once again proves the hypothesis that both Red Canary and Carbon Black have had for many years. You can't always know what's bad ahead of time, so we can't have a signature for this ransomware. And you need to leverage a behavioral method, because the attackers are now using leveraging non-malware threats, which effectively means they're using legitimate systems tools to conduct their ransom attacks, or their APT attacks. So what does that mean? How do you combat that? Well, rather than relying on a signature or a derivative of a signature, so an indicator of compromise is nothing other than a signature. Machine learning, a machine learned profile is just a machine learned signature. It looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. To looking at the behavior of what's happening to determine whether that threat is legitimate or not. And this is super important, because what it does, it sets the bar so high for the attackers. Once you've identified that illegitimate behavior, and you can detect and prevent from that illegitimate behavior, the bad guy doesn't just need to create a new set of JavaScript or a new PowerShell command or a new malware package or a new command and control center. They need to go and identify a whole new class of attack. And that's where we can shift through our automated detection and the work that Red Canary does on augmenting that automated detection, looking at behavior in order to protect from these threats that are using behavioral-based approaches and legitimate tools to deliver those attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's shift gears just a little bit. We'll start talking about some changes in the endpoint security market and ecosystem. And Kane, what you and I have talked about a lot is this idea of the platformization of endpoint security. And to put that a little more simply, what we're seeing is security more so being integrated into platforms more than ever before. See this with VMware's integration of Carbon Black and the intrinsic security roadmap. We see it with how aggressively Microsoft has been in pursuing their security roadmap. Common thread here is that it's, like Kane mentioned, built in rather than bolted on. And this is one that we expect to see continue as both companies and others continue to progress on that. There was a question that came through in the chat that I saw of, how would you compare Carbon Black and ATP? And I don't want to go too deep on that here in this discussion. But one thing I would very strongly state is that Carbon Black from the start has had the unfiltered telemetry approach with a centralized server. Microsoft's 6-8 years now behind on getting there. Doesn't mean they won't get there, but that's what's going on right now. Is that Carbon Black has this sizable lead, and Microsoft's doing a great job of aggressively pursuing their roadmap, but they are lagging behind, and so for a significant time into the future, you can expect Carbon Black to maintain that lead and have more telemetry and more access to tools.
Yeah, it's good point. What we're seeing holistically across the endpoint market is, the traditional players, the large consolidated EPP platforms, because they fundamentally rely on, these old methods of driving detection, they're ineffective. They're also bolted on. And so they're kind of coming out of fashion as the attackers continue to exploit the gaps in those platforms. There was a whole host of new up and comers over the last decade that have innovated and provided some new way of detection, new innovative way of detection, or some new innovative way of prevention, but they're still really, point solutions. There's a couple of us, and really like maybe two main players who took on the journey, at least and have been on that journey for at least 5 years in consolidating those capabilities. However, there was one main player who was looking at bolting the technology into the infrastructure, which was Microsoft. And so the big news in October when VMware acquired Carbon Black was, hey, VMware is getting into the security space in a mega meaningful way. But it was also that, hey, VMware is here to completely disrupt the security market, especially endpoint security. VMware is a player that, its technology, infrastructure technology covers everything from desktops to data centers, to hybrid data centers, to public cloud in an agnostic way. And so taking that capability and building it into that infrastructure in an agnostic manner is game changing. So, if I reflect on the last 5 years here at Carbon Black, I've had 5 number one competitors. The one that I was more cautious of in the long term was Microsoft, since they had an unfair share advantage because they're building the platform. But VMware really, being part of VMware really enables us to leapfrog that, because you're really agnostic across platforms. You think, we've built something for Azure, we've built something for AWS, we've built something for G Cloud, et cetera. VMware is a major partner, and many of the cloud providers leverage the VMware infrastructure to drive their platform. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece on the technology side, Microsoft kind of sets the bar when it comes to security. And hats off to Microsoft, they're setting the bar higher than ever before, right? Fundamentally, from a security kind of philosophical model, the bad guy's job is to innovate, and the bad guy's job is to operate above the bar, right? And so as you see Microsoft Defender used more mainstream, especially across home users, systems, et cetera, that'll become the bar, and the attackers will be operating in a much more sophisticated manner. And that's our job as an independent third-party security company. We'll continue to innovate there.
Yeah, it's great context. Go through a few more here. So another big trend, like in our world, in the MDR world, is that as the market has shaped, everyone's now complaining to be an MDR, right? And this can be a little bit tough to navigate if you're out there trying to figure out who to work with, because MDR in its pure definition is completely outcome focused, which doesn't really align particularly well with a lot of the legacy service providers. And I don't mean to disparage MSSPs. I certainly think they have their role to play. And it's not that they can't possibly do MDR. It's just that typically they use the same approach and just rebrand it as MDR, which is not an outcome-focused approach. So as MDR continues to move up market, MDR kind of started as a thing for smaller organizations. We've seen a trend where bigger and bigger organizations are turning to MDR providers. More people want to get into the game, and it makes things more confusing. So I think that's what I'd warn you if you're out there looking for an MDR provider is make sure that you are coming at it from the right angle, which we would argue very strongly is start with the outcomes and work your way back, as opposed to, hey, we're here to look at the alerts that other platforms produce. So that's my context. Kane, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on, Chris. I mean, you look at everyone claiming we're MDR2. You've got software vendors claiming they're MDR, right? Okay, they may be good at building software. Building a services company is a very, very different thing, and I challenge that the vast majority of them aren't anywhere well equipped to, even the MSSPs. And then the vast majority of the MSSPs are really managed security monitoring providers, right? The vast majority. And so as they rebrand as MDR providers, at best, they're actually delivering an MD offering, definitely not an MDR. So if you are looking at MDR, I would suggest heavily look at capabilities around R. And R, the MDR provider needs the right R platform, response platform. And once again, Carbon Black created the EDR category. We definitely created the R on the end of EDR with live response back in 2011, which opened up the industry for MDR. So, and then without a doubt, Red Canary are the ones that are automating R. So really, really look into that deep. I concur with you, Chris.
All right, appreciate that. This came up in a question before. Early on in the Red Canary Carbon Black story was the idea of assumption of breach, right? And that was kind of the ultimate buzzword. It got overused by the industry, but when I experienced over the last couple months in seeing companies go, from a primarily in-office environment to work from home, those that had been of that mindset early on that like, hey, there's no such thing as a safe network. The endpoints are my perimeter. Those organizations were pretty well suited when all of a sudden the plug got pulled and everybody had to be remote. The ones that weren't were kind of behind the 8 ball. And so, that's what we've seen with our customers. It's been almost no impact for those that, had strong things from that perspective, but there's been a lot of catch up and certainly the attack landscape is different when you've got somebody comfortable and sitting in a home environment, and they may not have their guard up as much as when they badge into an office. And match with that cloud adoption, SaaS adoption, the tools that we use coming from there. As we evolve over time, as mentioned earlier, we're going to have to get telemetry from new data sources, and I think that's a big part of the story in detection and response over time. Ken, I'm going to quickly go forward because we're running a little short on time. One that goes with the bolted on versus built-in story is on the technology front. We're seeing operating system vendors, progressively move services out of the kernel, move development out of the kernel and that access. This is a good thing from a security standpoint. The tough part is that a lot of the legacy providers that Kane mentioned, and even more modern providers, relied on that access to the operating system kernel in order to do their job. And so this is a great thing, but it also makes it incumbent on the platform providers and the OS providers to make that data and telemetry available to us. And so I think there's going to be winners and losers on that front over the next couple of years as people make this shift to being pushed a little bit out of the lower levels of the operating systems and have to consume things from outside. Kane, I'll hand this one to you, kind of the pendulum swing.
Yeah, I guess the real big game changer here at the moment is, look, security is a market that's always going to be fragmented. It's always going to be fragmented because, literally the bad guy's job description includes innovation. So they're always innovating attack methods, attack types across a new attack surface, right? And so point products are going to be built to solve those new and emerging threats. Now, generally, those new emerging threats are not mainstream yet. Generally they target, niche industries or niche technologies. And as those technologies are adopted, and as the threat actors start adopting those attack methodologies, then the problem becomes more mainstream. And so the challenge here is for the really big players. They don't generally focus on these niche areas until it becomes mainstream, in which it's too late. We saw this happen in the EPP market, where you had the big AV vendors just did not innovate, and the bad guys took advantage of it. And so the pendulum really, really swung in one direction, and a whole host of different vendors emerged that, as I said, created some new innovative way of detecting, preventing, or responding to these types of attacks. What we're seeing now is the pendulum swinging back to consolidated, integrated, certainly on the endpoint. We saw this happen, 10, 15 odd years ago in a big way in the other big category of security, which is network security. You would have seen, UTM emerged as a category, but then, application-aware firewalls emerged with, disruption from the likes of Palo Alto. So we saw the market go through a major transition like that with the emergence of UTM and kind of next generation firewalls back a decade ago. And what's happening right now is the pendulum swinging back to, the best teammate rather than, best athlete type of approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Quickly to cover this one, we've talked a lot about this in the combination of different data sources. The one key point I'd make on XDR is that this XDR really represents a mindset shift away from the legacy SIM and log approach to really focusing on telemetry and where you get the best telemetry. And so I think the way I see it is, endpoint EDR proved the need for that low level telemetry and moving beyond logs. And now that we can add on network context and things like that, it's just going to make the tools that we have and the opportunity we have to do detection that much stronger. And Carbon Black is a great story around integrating into MDR plays over the years and continues now to build out their XDR stack with the last line integration that Kane mentioned. All right, that's kind of the end of our presentation. 7 seconds left. Thanks to everybody. If there were questions that we didn't get to, we'll try to get to them and answer offline. If you're interested in seeing all this in action, reach out to Red Canary, reach out to Carbon Black, and we'd love to talk deeper. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Kane, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Peace, guys.
Thanks, everyone.